Good evening, my dear friends. I'll start in Italian, and then my lecture will be delivered in English. Caro Presidente Parisi, Professor Antonelli, caro Presidente Emerito Quadrio Curzio, Professor Brunori, Professor Gambaro, an old friend. Cari amici, sono lieta e onorata di essere qui all'Accademia dei Lincei e di darvi una delle conferenze Lincei dedicata agli soci scomparsi dei Lincei, questa volta a professore Vincenzo Arangio Ruiz, socio nazionale dell'Accademia dei Lincei e il suo presidente, e professore Levin Goldschmidt, professore all'Università di Heidelberg, a Germania, socio e straniero dei Lincei. Questi due professori riassumono la natura della scienza e dell'Accademia, senza confini, senza riferimento alla religione o all'etnia, uniti dalla curiosità, dalla libertà e dalla ricerca della verità. Sono una professoressa di legge privata e sono sempre stata interessata in diritto comparato. La mia prima lezione di legge all'Università di Tel Aviv era il diritto romano, in cui ero e sono ancora molto interessata. Dopo qualche anno sono diventata una professoressa esperta in contratto, una parte di legge commerciale. I due professori, Arangio Ruiz e Goldschmidt, che hanno dato un contributo enorme al diritto romano e alla legge commerciale, sono vicini alla mia esperienza legale e sono onorata di dedicare la mia conferenza a entrambi. Alcune frasi sulla nostra Accademia e sul me. Sono la seconda presidente femminile dell'Accademia Scientifica Israeliana, dopo mia collega professor Ruth Arnon. Prima della legge sono stata rettore dell'Università di Tel Aviv, la prima donna, l'unica finora. Come donna che crede nel diritto di ogni donna di perseguire una vita indipendente e significativa, vorrei dedicare la mia conferenza a tutte le donne del mondo. Il titolo della mia conferenza è Love Story. Si occupa della tensione tra libertà artistica e privacy. Per quanto riguarda i rapporti tra me e l'Accademia italiana e Italia generalmente, c'è una pura storia d'amore, una storia d'amore eterna senza alcuna tensione. Grazie per l'invito e grazie per essere qui. Passerò ora all'inglese. This is a lecture on human rights, on human dignity, in particular on the transformation of human rights with regard to women. Human rights is an idea developed within liberal thought, under which there are some rights to which each and every individual is entitled from our very existence. The most familiar rights are the right to life, freedom of movement, equality, freedom of expression, privacy, the right to property. The conceptual and historical basis of human rights is is grounded in the French and American Revolution. It later on has been incorporated in the constitution of almost any nation, and in Europe, in the European Convention on Human Rights. In Israel, we do not have a formal constitution as such, but we have basic laws, the most important of which is Basic Law, Human Dignity and Liberty, under which basic human rights are guaranteed and protected, among them the right to freedom of movement, equality, freedom of expression or speech, and privacy. In the 20th century, part of human rights have undergone revolution. In particular, the principle of equality, freedom of expression, and privacy, which is relatively a new right. One of the most central issues regarding human rights is encountered in the case where there is a clash between rights. For example, equality and freedom. Does freedom include also a freedom to discriminate? Or does the right of equality is superior to the freedom to discriminate? Always? Also in the private sector? The basis of my lecture relates to a conflict between two rights. The right of artistic expression on the one hand, and the right of privacy on the other hand. It deals also with the relations between law and literature, in which I'm deeply interested. So, let's start. Our immediate question is this: what are the limits of artistic freedom? What should be the fate of a book relating the love affair between an older married man and a young woman with close accuracy, so much so that the young woman could be identified by distant acquaintances despite the pseudonyms? This was dealt in Israel Supreme Court a few years ago. The name of the case is Anonymous Man Against Anonymous Woman, which tells us the legal fate of a love story. The triangle of love, story, law is obviously not a unique Israeli matter. Similar stories were raised in Germany, in America, and we shall relate to them later on. So, let's start with love. Our hero, a middle-aged man, married with children, lived with his family in Jerusalem. A young woman, a student at an art college, lived with her partner near our men's neighborhood. She made a living working at a cinema in Jerusalem, and there she met our anonymous hero. With the passage of time, the tie between the two became a close and intimate relationship which lasted about 5 years. At first, it was secret, and later it was revealed to their close circle. At the climax of the affair, the young woman left her boyfriend, and the man divorced his wife. The woman concentrated on her final thesis in art about the relations between a man and a woman. The man, too, began to work on a book of his own, his maiden novel, whose plot was a drama of the breakup of a family. Thus, we arrive at the story, at the book. What is the contents of the book? The book portrays an intimate relationship between a man of the author's age who does not like his married life and a young woman student. It begins with their first encounter at a cinema in Jerusalem. The occupations of the novel's protagonists are similar to those of our real heroes. At the start of their acquaintance, the hero is married, living with his wife in Jerusalem. The heroine, a young single woman, a student at an art college, rents an apartment in Jerusalem near the hero's home, where she lives with her boyfriend. In appearance, the heroine is like the woman, even in the number of tattoos on her body. The novel contains letters she wrote to the hero, as well as the final thesis that she wrote in the course of her studies. The intimate tie between the two is presented minutely in all its 50 gray shades. So this is the book. On completion, the novel was published by a well-known publisher. It contained a disclaimer. The plot, the characters described in it, and their names are all the product of the author's imagination. Any connection between the novel's plot and events that occurred in reality, as well as between the characters named in it and persons or names of individuals living or dead, is entirely accidental. This was the waiver. The book's launch was accompanied by a marketing campaign through the media, including an interview in the weekend supplement of a widely circulated newspaper and a TV interview, and on various internet sites. And now it is the turn of law to step in. Immediately upon publication of the novel, the woman approached the man and the publishing house with a demand to cease the marketing and distributing of the novel, to recall the copies, and to compensate her for damages she had suffered. The negotiations between the two sides failed, whereupon the woman filed a court action, and the court issued a temporary injunction prohibiting distribution of the novel. The woman claimed that there was an exact match between her life and the life of the book's protagonists, except the names. The author omitted no detail of her world, her body, her feelings, her weaknesses, her secrets, her relations with her parents, family members, her sexual preferences. He also used her letters and her final thesis, thus infringing her copyright in them. The book, she said, was a major attack on her privacy and was libelous, portraying her as being engaged in an affair with a married man while living with her partner, thus manipulating people as if they were objects. For his part, the author claimed that the book was a work of art, a work of fiction, as he indicated in the book itself. In his opinion, insofar as there was any invasion of the woman's privacy, it must be weighed against his artistic freedom. In the circumstances of the case, he claimed withdrawing the book was unthinkable. What did the court decide? The Supreme Court, Israeli Supreme Court, ruled unanimously that the woman's privacy had been violated. The court stressed that the novel was a documentary work disguised as work of art or fiction that inflicted grave injury on the respondent's privacy. In the present case, it was decided that the element of fiction was slight and the injury great. In consequence, distribution of the book was prohibited, and the man was ordered to pay the woman about $50,000 as damages for invasion of her privacy. Public reactions, mainly of the media, forever concerned about freedom of expression, were mixed. Some supported the result, others raised a cry about book censorship. The story raises a thorny dilemma. Does a book which labels itself as fiction grant its writer absolute immunity and allows complete artistic freedom even if the author makes use of biographical details of others? Should the heading matter or the contents of the book? A considerable part of the Israeli case, of the Israeli judgment, was devoted to autobiographical writing, its virtues, and its serving as a means to decipher the truth and demolish the monopoly on knowledge. But our context is rather different. The book did not pretend to be autobiographical, even though, after the event, it was determined that it bore such a character. In any case, the tension between the autobiographical composition and the fictional one lies at the heart of the ruling. How do fiction and non-fiction writing differ? The simple distinction is as follows. Non-fiction is based on facts and persons that existed in reality, while fiction rests on an imaginary plot and invented characters. With a written documentary, the intention is that readers believe that the events portrayed relate to events that actually happened, while in fiction, the intention is that the readers imagined the plot. Yet, this basic distinction is dubious. Epistemologically, the question, what is reality and what is the truth describing it, is inherently vague. One might argue that literature is all fiction, but also that it is all truth. An author draws on what lies in the domain of her personal knowledge and experience, even when she writes an imaginary piece. Indeed, many writers attest personally that in every one of their invented works, a link to their own or to others' reality can be found, not to mention that quite a few fictional books are romans à clef. Let us refer to Dante, La Divina Commedia. Dante describes one of his enemies, Filippo Argenti, in a very critical mode. Could we ever think that this glorious eternal work be censored because of the injury to some of Dante's enemies? There are many other examples. I would like to mention Israeli Nobel laureate Agnon, who wrote a great book, Shira, in which the Hebrew University, with its professors, is playing a major role. Some professors are portrayed with scorned contempt. Could a court have banned the publication of such a book on the grounds of libel or of invasion of some of the professors' privacy? Indeed, the book was published after Agnon's death. Agnon delayed the book's publication. He might not have wanted to risk litigation by some of the book's protagonists forcing their way in from the real world, nor did he wish to put his own privacy at risk. Presumably, parts of the novel reflected his own life as well. True enough, I'll turn later. True enough, literature, a kind of imitation of reality, is the product of writers' imagination, which at times is limited by their experiences of reality, hence the blurred lines between fiction and biography or autobiography. Hence, the distinction between autobiography and fiction as a literary genre is difficult to draw. And the question is, does this literary similarity carry legal implications? Let's get back to our case. The author, in our case, submitted opinions of two literary experts, professors of literature in Israel, from which it transpired that the very publication of a book as a work of fiction raises a barrier against regarding the book's content as documentation describing reality. That means that if the writer of a book calls it fiction, then the work should be regarded as such without any relevance to its contents and should be protected against any action for libel or invasion of privacy. But this assumption is not acceptable by all. The counter-argument places the work itself at the center and puts forward the act of reading and interpreting. Roland Barthes' position is particularly well known. He is the extreme representative of the supremacy of the reader-interpreter when he speaks of the death of the author. The relevant reader in our context is the court, not an ordinary reader-interpreter, but a reader-interpreter with binding authority. Indeed, our court chose to put the question of fiction or documentation to the substantive test, therefore rejected both the expert's argument and the author's and publisher's disclaimer that the book is the product of the author's imagination. The court decided that when story and reality are markedly similar, and the story also sets out factual descriptions of others, the author has a duty to those others anchored in the right to their reputation and privacy. So the ruling banned the publication of the book and ordered, as mentioned, ordered the author to pay damages to the claimant for invasion of her privacy. Did the judgment go too far? In rendering his Thank you. In rendering his decision, the judge resorted particularly to a ruling of the Federal German Constitutional Court, which in fact prohibited the publication of a novel entitled Ezra. In 2008, the novel told the romantic story of a writer and an actress. The actress, who was once the partner of the writer, claimed that there was a match between her person and the character of the heroine as depicted in the novel. the German court ruled that despite the author's declaration that this was a work of fiction, the book was in fact grounded in the reality of the author's life. It was disguised as fiction, but the claimant's social circle could easily identify her as the protagonist of the novel. Because at issue here was a direct injury to the core area of private life, the book was banned for publication. And now I want to get back to Goethe. And I'd like to mention that two of the minority judges in the German Ezra case noted that the majority opinion banning the book leads to the imposition of a taboo on sexuality, along with unreasonable restriction of freedom of artistic expression. They commented, the minority judges, that by the approach of the majority, Goethe's The Sorrows of Young Werther would have been barred from publication. This book was also a maiden novel telling of Goethe's beloved Lotte and her fiancé, and it's, of course, one of the classics. So this is for Germany, and how would an American court react in such a case, given the almost sacred position of freedom of expression in American law? So we have a case, it's called Smith and Stewart, in which liability was imposed on a writer of a book. The title of the book is The Red Hat Club, which featured on the New York Times bestseller list in 2003. And the liability was imposed on account of injury to reputation of the claimant, who was the hero of the book. And despite the heroine's different name, and even though the book carried a disclaimer, the court ruled that this book related the intimate life of the plaintiff. So distribution of the book was not withheld, but the author and the publishers were ordered to pay the plaintiff damages in the amount of $100,000. The outcome of this case highlights the difference between American and European law, and also Israeli law. American law would not sanction withdrawal of the book, but would occasionally, rarely, impose liability on the author for violation of privacy. Therefore, in principle, when an American court allows an expression that invades privacy to continue to exist, along with liability for damages, it does not express true aversion to the invasion of privacy. In fact, it gives privacy only partial protection. And a similar approach to the American law was recently taken in the European Court of Human Rights, albeit under different circumstances. The case of Almeida, an authoress, a Portuguese national, published a book presenting the life of a family under a nom de plume. The book, which was published in 100 copies, it was not for commercial dissemination, was distributed gratis to the author's friends and relations. In the book, it was noted that the work was the product of the author's imagination, but some of the author's relatives submitted a criminal complaint against her for defamation of their reputation and honor. The Portuguese court imposed a duty to pay damages in the amount of 53,000 euros, and the European Court of Human Rights confirmed this ruling. So far, the discussion has been devoted to the contest between freedom of artistic expression and the right to privacy. The court, the Israeli court, gave precedence to privacy. And the issue I want to address now with you is this. Can a connection be found between the couple's private story and the legal decision to prohibit publication of their life story? And to answer, I want a comparative response, and with you, I want to return to literature, this time to the book of Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, apparently based on documentation of actual events, which in some way are parallel to the story of our heroes. Both stories reflect diverse moral, cultural, legal perceptions of the freedom to love and the ability to keep the secrets of love. So we are back to story, love, law in Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne, who published it in 1850. This book is considered by many as one of the best world literature. It is the story of forbidden love, denial, public condemnation, jealousy, tragedy. And the story is the following. Hester Prynne is a married woman whose husband stays in England, and he is sending her ahead of time to the New World, where she lives alone in 17th century Boston. Sometime after her arrival, it is discovered that Hester is pregnant. She is jailed for adultery. Attempts to exact from her the father's name fail. She protects the remnants of the privacy she still has and refuses to disclose her lover's name. She is prosecuted, convicted, placed on the scaffold of shame with the infant, the fruit of her sin, before the entire community. Then she is sent away with her daughter to the edge of the village. She is condemned forever to carry on her garments the stigma A, standing for adulteress. Hester, the most skilled needlewoman in the colony, herself embroidered the spectacular sign in scarlet. We may keep in mind that A is also the first letter of the word artist. The plot thickens. Hester's husband arrives in Boston. Hester and her lovers plan to leave the place and realize that their love fails. In the end, the lover is exposed. He places himself on the scaffold of shame before the eyes of the public and dies. Hawthorne wrote the book as a historical novel, apparently drawing on authentic events of the 17th century. A native of the town of Salem, Massachusetts, of ill repute for its witch hunts, Hawthorne describes the tragic twists of extramarital love in 17th century Puritan New England, the community's hypocrisy, and the tension between the individual's soul and society's fetters. Some claim that the book was written as an atonement for the role played by one of his ancestors, a judge in Salem, who convicted some of the witches of that time. So the Scarlet Letter portrays a cultural and legal reality. This reality could not be fully exposed in full details in the pages of 17th century American literature because such literature was proscribed. Intimacy could be revealed only through court records and rulings or through private diaries which reflect real life, not works of fiction. Times have changed, and with them norms on the personal and the public level equally. Our heroine's fate has been kind to her, as has the fate of all women in the liberal democracies from the 20th century on. Our woman who, like Hester, engages in art is free to build her intimate emotional life. She lives with a partner, not in the framework of marriage. She maintains a relationship with another partner, married, whose marriage is formally breaking up at the time of his connection with her. Society does not haul her up onto a scaffold of shame. She is not considered an adulteress. And on the public level, free speech and the freedom to create allow the telling of bold stories that disclose the details of love. But even freedom of writing has its limits. Publication of the book brought disgrace on our heroine from Israel, not criminal disgrace like Hester's, but the disgrace of exposure of her privacy. Our heroine has the right to live her private life as she wishes, far from the public eye, and the public exposure imposed on her against her will is prevented. Contrary to our heroine, Hester, from Nathaniel Hawthorne, was not entitled to live any private life she might choose, nor could she prevent its exposure to all. And from the change in the concepts of Puritanism to liberalism, I would like to relate to censorship. In the past, censorship was harsh. The legal culture and the culture around that prevailed in the former century have not allowed not to have a free, liberal, intimate life, and have not allowed the publication of bold art products. And since the second half of the 20th century, almost the entire Western world has changed. In a liberal society, religious faith is a private matter. A liberal society lauds liberty, equality, women's liberation, permissiveness, and the formation of new kinds of partnership contrary to tradition. And now the chains are loosened not only between the intimate partner themselves, even the chains of censorship in the name of public morality have been removed. One of the heralds of cultural change, well, this of course relates to the right of women to be equal to men in every matter, in intimate life, in marriage, and now from censorship to freedom of expression. So one of the heralds of cultural change was D.H. Lawrence, who first published Lady Chatterley's Lover in Florence in 1928. The Italian culture could manage the book's audacity, but the English could not. In England, official publication of the book was made only in 1960, following an action against Penguin Books, the publisher of the book in England. So censorship was lifted and has almost wholly disappeared, but new obstacles arose in the world with the untying of old bonds. A person injured by exposure is entitled to request the legal system to prohibit the publication in the name of privacy. The right of privacy was born with the rise of freedom of action on the personal level and freedom of expression on the public level, which prepared fertile ground for media exposure and potential assault on the private life of every person. The right to be let alone was formulated theoretically in the seminal article of Warren and Brandeis at the end of the 19th century. Already then, the authors pointed out the phenomena of invasion of privacy and the need to offer legal protection against it. Never in their wildest dreams could they have imagined the technological developments since then. Nowadays, Big Brother is hidden, better revealed in each and every one of us through tools of immortalization and dissemination, some form of which almost everyone carries about: cameras, recording devices, newspapers, books, plays, films, social networks, internet, and of course, cellular phones, in which all of these are contained. The phenomenon of shaming poses a challenge before every system of law. What are the proper limits of freedom of expression? How are the fences of the self to be guarded? How many involuntary exposure be prevented? How are hidden islands of intimacy created in a world exposed before the eyes of all? The internet and social networks generate thorny problems for society, and it is argued that upholding this right in the present day is almost impossible. In this framework, I do not discuss these weighty issues, but mention only that European law recognizes the right to be forgotten, whereby the individual may demand the erasure of injurious matter that is no longer relevant or of public interest from the procurers of digital information. Today's problems differ wholly from those of the time when everything intimate was policed through criminal and civil legislation, where entry into the intimate home was barred, nor could documentary or fictional writings that struck the individual privacy be published. In that age, the need for protection of privacy was not acute, but with the rise of gender equality, with the loosening of legal moral rules, and with the liberation from state policing, which oversaw intimate behavior on the individual level, and the lowering of barriers to audacious publication on the public level, everyone, women included, became vulnerable to invasive publicity that touched private life. The task of defending the intimate sphere now passed partially to the individual herself through development of a right to privacy. And now I would like to conclude by relating to the ideas that I tried to share with you. Down the course of history, the fate in life, literature, and law of protagonists of intimate books of the kind under consideration exhibits a reversal of social legal perceptions. Today, adultery is not a tort or a criminal offense. Today, Hester's story would probably not be considered a criminal offense and would not be publicly exposed against her will. Censorship has changed its forms. Nowadays, no sexual moral censorship by the state exists, and it is not the state that forbids intimate, daring publication, but whoever is injured is entitled to request prohibition of publication. The earlier chain of contrasts, sexual restriction against freedom, prohibition of publication of obscenity against almost limitless freedom of expression, shifting the burden of prohibition of publication from the state to individual. These are joined by another tension concerning the nature of the court as a public arena open to all. At the time of state censorship, when the state regulated the individual's intimate life and prohibited publication of fictional writing that corrupted moral decency, the court served as a public forum for condemnation of sinners, exposing before the public daring and forbidden life stories. Today, personal freedom and artistic freedom are almost unlimited, but the principle of the court's open doors has been undermined. Precisely, the recognition of the right to privacy justifies blocking access to the court and its documents. The result is that when courts deal with intimate matters, the names and other identifying details of the litigants are omitted from the judgments, and often such cases are heard in closed doors. The love story of our heroes, which was prohibited from distribution and withdrawn because of its identifying details, finds itself, despite the blocking of the protagonist's name, splashed all over the decisions pages with many identifying details in place. These pages will probably carry the story of these two for a longer time among a wider public than the pages of our hero's novel would have done, but they remain anonymous. So let's really conclude the encounter of love, story, law with a very short summation. The start of the story is love that has died. Its continuation is a story that wished to resurrect that love, if only temporarily. And its end is a court case that killed the story of the love and lit a fire that burned the story's pages in the temple of privacy. As fierce as death, love indeed is, or in Italian, davvero forte come la morte e amore, dal canto dei cantici. Thank you very much.